Tonight's story is a quiet journey through history, made for you to simply listen to as you drift off to sleep. The giant squid is well known as one of the largest and most mysterious creatures in the ocean. But tonight, we'll take a deeper look at its story. First, turn the volume down a little. Then, simply lie back, close your eyes, and make yourself comfortable. There is no need to follow every word. Just let the story drift quietly in the background. And if you fall asleep along the way, that is perfectly fine. And now, let tonight's story slowly begin. Far below the surface of the ocean, beyond the bright blue water familiar to swimmers and sailors, there is another world. Sunlight weakens as it travels downward. Colors disappear. The temperature falls, and eventually, hundreds of meters beneath the waves, the ocean becomes a place of almost continuous darkness. It is here, in this enormous hidden world, that one of the most famous animals of the deep sea lives: the giant squid. Its scientific name is Architeuthis dux. For centuries, people knew almost nothing about this animal. They found pieces of it. They found bodies washed onto beaches. They found strange marks on whales. Sailors returned from long journeys with stories about enormous creatures seen briefly at the surface. But the living giant squid remained almost completely hidden. That is one of the reasons its story is so unusual. Many animals became familiar to science because people could simply go to the place where they lived and watch them. Scientists could follow elephants across grasslands, observe birds from a forest, or study fish in shallow coastal water. The giant squid offered no such convenience. Its home was hundreds of meters beneath the sea, and for most of human history, reaching those depths was impossible. Even after submarines, deep-sea cameras, and remotely operated vehicles were invented, finding one particular animal in the vastness of the ocean remained extremely difficult. A giant squid may be a large creature, but the ocean is much larger. And so, for generations, our understanding of the giant squid came mostly from animals that were already dead or dying. A specimen might wash onto a distant beach. Another might become caught in a fishing net. A beak might be recovered from the stomach of a sperm whale. A damaged tentacle might be brought to shore. From these fragments, scientists slowly assembled the picture of a real animal, not a mythical monster, not a serpent, not the legendary kraken, but something almost as remarkable: a large, deep-sea cephalopod with 8 arms, 2 very long feeding tentacles, enormous eyes, a powerful beak, hundreds of toothed suckers, and a body perfectly adapted to a cold and dim environment. And although the giant squid has now been photographed and filmed alive, much about it remains unknown. Even today, scientists continue to debate basic questions. Exactly how long can it live? How quickly does it grow? How does it find a mate in the darkness? How common is it? How does it behave when no camera is nearby? And what happens during the countless hours it spends moving through a part of the planet that humans almost never see? Those questions make the giant squid especially interesting. It is not simply an animal from the past. Its history is still being written. To understand the giant squid, it helps first to understand what kind of animal it is. Despite its unusual appearance, the giant squid belongs to one of the most familiar groups of marine animals. It is a mollusk. That means it is distantly related to creatures such as snails, clams, oysters, slugs, octopuses, and other squid. Within the mollusks, it belongs to the group known as cephalopods. Cephalopods have a very long evolutionary history. Their ancestors have existed in the oceans for hundreds of millions of years. Some ancient cephalopods carried large external shells. Ammonites, for example, were once common in prehistoric seas. Modern squid took a different path. Instead of carrying a large external shell, they developed a streamlined, soft body that allowed them to move efficiently through the water. The giant squid follows this basic squid design, only on a remarkable scale. Its main body is called the mantle. The mantle contains many of the animal's internal organs and the powerful muscles used in swimming. At the rear of the mantle are two relatively small fins. These fins help with movement and control. At the front is the head, and around the mouth is what may be the most recognizable part of a squid: 8 arms. But the giant squid also has 2 additional limbs. These are the feeding tentacles. So although people sometimes describe a squid simply as having many arms, the arrangement is more specific. 8 arms, 2 longer tentacles, 10 limbs in total. The difference between an arm and a tentacle is important. The arms carry suckers along much of their length. The 2 feeding tentacles are different. They are long and relatively narrow, with enlarged areas near their tips called clubs. These clubs carry groups of powerful suckers. A giant squid can extend the feeding tentacles outward to catch prey and then draw that prey back toward its mouth. And those suckers are not simply smooth suction cups. Around them are hard rings with finely serrated edges. On a large giant squid, individual suckers may measure several centimeters across. Hundreds of them can work together. The result is an extremely effective gripping system. Evidence of those suckers has sometimes been found on the skin of sperm whales. Circular marks and scars on whales helped scientists understand that these 2 enormous animals sometimes meet in the deep ocean. The squid may try to hold on to the whale. The whale, meanwhile, is trying to eat the squid. It is one of the most famous predator and prey relationships in the sea, although people have almost never witnessed such encounters directly. At the center of the squid's arms is its mouth. Inside is a hard beak. It is often compared to the beak of a parrot because of its curved shape. This beak breaks food into smaller pieces. Behind it is another feeding structure called the radula. The radula is a tongue-like organ covered with many tiny teeth. Together, the beak and radula reduce prey to pieces small enough to swallow. This is especially important because of an unusual feature of squid anatomy. The esophagus passes through the brain. The animal, therefore, cannot simply swallow extremely large objects whole. Its food must be reduced to manageable pieces before passing through. The arrangement sounds strange from a human point of view, but it is perfectly normal for a squid. And it reminds us that the body of a giant squid is not simply a familiar animal enlarged to enormous proportions. It belongs to a completely different branch of animal life. Perhaps the most famous features of the giant squid are its eyes. They are enormous. Usements vary among specimens, but giant squid eyes can approach roughly the size of a dinner plate. They rank among the largest eyes known in the animal kingdom, together with those of the colossal squid. To understand why such large eyes might be useful, picture the place where the animal lives. Several hundred meters beneath the ocean surface, there is very little sunlight. At greater depths, essentially no daylight remains. Yet darkness in the ocean is not always completely empty of light. Many deep-sea organisms produce their own light through bioluminescence. Tiny flashes may appear when an animal moves. A jellyfish may glow. A small creature may produce a brief blue-green signal. The giant squid's enormous eyes can collect very small amounts of light that may help it detect prey. But large eyes may serve another important purpose. They may help a squid notice large predators moving through the darkness. The most important of those predators is the sperm whale. Sperm whales are extraordinary deep divers. They can descend into the same dark regions inhabited by giant squid. And scientists have repeatedly found giant squid remains inside sperm whale stomachs. The squid's hard beak resists digestion, so beaks can remain behind even after softer tissue has disappeared. For scientists, those beaks became valuable evidence. Long before researchers could regularly see giant squid alive, whales were effectively bringing information about them back from the deep. A whale stomach containing giant squid beaks told scientists something very important. Giant squid were not merely isolated accidents that occasionally washed ashore. There had to be enough of them in the ocean for sperm whales to find and eat them. This created one of the great paradoxes of the animal. To humans, giant squid seemed almost impossibly rare. To sperm whales, apparently, they were much less mysterious. In some parts of the world, whales must encounter them regularly. The explanation is simple. Humans and sperm whales experience different oceans. We spend almost all of our time at the surface. Sperm whales routinely enter the squid's world. What is rare to us may be ordinary several hundred meters below. That thought changes the way we imagine the deep sea. A creature may be enormous, it may exist in large numbers, and yet it can remain almost entirely outside human experience. When people hear the words giant squid, the first question is often very simple. How giant is it? Unfortunately, this is also one of the questions that has produced the greatest confusion. For generations, stories described enormous squid reaching extraordinary lengths. Reports of individuals around 20 meters long appeared from time to time. Even larger numbers entered popular culture. But squid are difficult animals to measure accurately. Their two feeding tentacles can stretch considerably. Dead specimens can become damaged, arms and tentacles may be missing. Bodies found floating at sea may become swollen, and early reports were not always made under careful scientific conditions. For these reasons, modern researchers tend to treat spectacular historical measurements cautiously. The best scientifically documented giant squid have total lengths in the neighborhood of 13 meters when the long feeding tentacles are included. That is already enormous. 13 meters is longer than many city buses. But most of that length does not come from the central body. The mantle is far shorter. Scientists often use mantle length as a more reliable measurement because a mantle does not stretch in the way that tentacles can. The longest carefully measured giant squid mantles are a little over 2 meters long. Add the head and 8 arms, and the main part of the animal is typically well under the enormous numbers sometimes suggested by its fully extended tentacles. Then add the two extraordinary feeding tentacles, and the complete animal can reach much farther. Females generally grow larger than males. Historical sources and scientific references sometimes give somewhat different maximum figures, partly because the condition of specimens varies and because older measurements were made differently. The safest picture is therefore not of a 20 or 30 meter monster, but of an animal capable of reaching roughly 10 meters or more, with exceptional, scientifically documented individuals around 13 meters in total length. That is still one of the largest invertebrates living on Earth. Another useful distinction is between length and weight. The giant squid has an extremely long body plan. Its feeding tentacles contribute greatly to its total length, but another deep-sea squid, the colossal squid, has a more heavily built body. The colossal squid may be shorter in total length, yet substantially heavier. So asking which squid is the largest depends partly on what we mean by largest. Longest? Heaviest? Largest mantle? The giant squid is famous for extraordinary length. The colossal squid is generally regarded as the heavier and more robust animal. The two are sometimes confused, but they are different species from different families. The giant squid, Architeuthis dux, has a broad worldwide distribution. The colossal squid, Architeuthis hamiltoni, is associated with the cold waters of the Southern Ocean around Antarctica. The colossal squid has a massive body and relatively shorter limbs. The giant squid has the more elongated form. For tonight's story, our main subject remains the giant squid. But the comparison is useful because it shows that even the phrase largest squid does not have one simple answer. The deep ocean has produced more than one kind of giant. The giant squid's body has several other adaptations that make sense only when we remember where it lives. Like other squid, it moves partly by jet propulsion. Water enters the mantle cavity. Muscles then contract and force the water out through a structure called the siphon or funnel. The expelled water pushes the squid in the opposite direction. By changing the direction of the siphon, the animal can change its movement. Its fins provide additional control. A giant squid is therefore not simply drifting helplessly through the deep. It can actively maneuver. Exactly how energetic it normally is remains a matter of scientific discussion. Some observations suggest that it can move rapidly when attacking prey. Other researchers have proposed a slower lifestyle in which the animal conserves energy and waits for suitable opportunities. The limited number of observations makes it difficult to define one simple pattern of behavior. And that uncertainty is important. A few minutes of video cannot tell us everything about an animal's entire life. The giant squid also needs a way to remain suspended in the water without constantly using enormous amounts of energy. Many fish use gas-filled swim bladders to control buoyancy. That solution is less convenient for an animal living at great depth because gases change volume as pressure changes. Giant squid, instead, contain compounds rich in ammonium ions within their tissues. These fluids are less dense than seawater and help the animal maintain buoyancy. This chemistry has an interesting side effect. Giant squid are not considered attractive seafood for humans. Their tissues do not resemble the familiar calamari found on a restaurant plate. The chemistry that helps them float gives them an unusual taste. Perhaps that is fortunate for the squid. Human beings have become major predators of many large marine species. The giant squid has largely avoided that fate. Commercial fishing vessels sometimes catch them accidentally, but there has never been a major human fishery built around giant squid as food. Their true ecological relationship with people has been mostly accidental. We find them when they strand, we catch them unintentionally, we preserve them in museums, we try to photograph them. For most of history, the giant squid has simply continued living far beneath us. Giant squid appear to occur across a remarkably large part of the planet. Specimens have been found in or near the North Atlantic, South Atlantic, North Pacific, and Southwestern Pacific. They are associated with places such as Newfoundland, Norway, the waters around the British Isles and Spain, Southern Africa, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia. They seem to be less common in tropical waters and in the most extreme polar regions. Many records occur around continental and island slopes. These are places where the seafloor falls away from shallower water into the deeper ocean. Exactly how deep giant squid normally live is still not perfectly known. Reported ranges often fall somewhere from a few hundred meters down to around 1,000 meters, and they may sometimes go deeper. Think for a moment about what 500 meters of water means. If you were standing at the surface above a giant squid, there might be half a kilometer of ocean between you and the animal. At 1,000 meters, a full kilometer of seawater would separate you. Pressure increases steadily with depth. The temperature is low. Sunlight is absent or extremely weak. Human eyes cannot simply look down from a boat and see what is happening. This explains why the early history of giant squid research depended so heavily on chance. Scientists could not go out for an afternoon walk and find one. The animal had to come to them. A storm or current might carry a body toward shore. A fishing trawler might accidentally bring one up. A sperm whale might strand with squid remains in its stomach. Each event offered another fragment, and each fragment had to be carefully preserved and studied. That process continued for centuries. Long before modern zoology gave the giant squid a scientific name, people were already describing enormous squid-like animals. In the 4th century before the Common Era, the Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote about a large squid that he distinguished from smaller varieties. The measurements recorded in ancient texts must be treated carefully, but the important point is that very large squid were known to Mediterranean observers more than 2,000 years ago. Several centuries later, the Roman writer Pliny the Elder also described an enormous squid-like creature. His account included dramatic measurements. Like many ancient natural history writings, Pliny's work blended observation, second-hand reports, and stories that modern zoologists would approach cautiously. Still, these texts reveal something important. People living around the sea occasionally encountered creatures that seemed far larger than ordinary squid. Without modern marine biology, it was difficult to know exactly what they were seeing, and so fact and imagination naturally became mixed together. The oceans of the ancient world were enormous, unknown spaces. Sailors knew only the surface. They could see waves, whales, dolphins, fish, and occasionally strange objects rising from below. Anything that appeared unexpectedly could become part of a story. Over centuries, European maritime culture developed many legends of sea monsters. Among the most famous was the Kraken of northern tradition. Later versions of the Kraken described an enormous, tentacled creature capable of threatening ships. Modern popular culture often connects the Kraken directly with the giant squid. The real history is more complicated. Not every old sea monster story can be confidently identified as a giant squid. Some were probably inspired by whales. Others may have involved large fish, floating objects, unfamiliar marine animals, or pure storytelling. Historians have also warned that later writers sometimes connected older myths with the giant squid only after the animal became better known scientifically. So it would be too simple to say that every ancient tentacled monster was really Architeuthis. But genuine giant squid encounters almost certainly contributed to the broader human idea that enormous and unfamiliar creatures lived beneath the sea. Imagine a sailor before the age of photography finding several meters of tentacle floating beside a boat. There would be no museum guide nearby, no internet, no scientific illustration. Perhaps nobody in the crew had seen anything similar. A strange body part from an animal that normally lived hundreds of meters below would seem almost impossible. And when the story was told again in another harbor, details might change. A 10-meter animal might become 20. A dead squid might become a creature that attacked a ship. A brief sighting could become a battle. This is how natural history and folklore can overlap, not because every story is true, and not because every story is false, but because human beings try to explain unfamiliar things using the knowledge available to them. For much of history, the giant squid lived exactly at that boundary, real enough to leave evidence, rare enough to seem unbelievable. One particularly interesting part of this history involves the so-called sea monk. In 16th century Northern Europe, records described a strange marine creature whose appearance supposedly resembled a monk wearing a robe. Centuries later, Danish zoologist Japetus Steenstrup examined these old reports. Steenstrup was one of the scientists who helped move the giant squid from folklore into formal zoology. He proposed that at least some descriptions of the sea monk could have resulted from decomposing or distorted giant squid. A squid mantle, fins, arms, and tentacles can look very different after death. Skin may be damaged, the body may lose its normal shape. The animal seen on a beach may barely resemble the living creature that moved through deep water. Steenstrup recognized that unusual remains did not require a mythical explanation. They could belong to an extraordinary but natural animal. During the 1850s, he studied pieces and reports of large squid and established the genus Architeuthis. The name is generally interpreted as meaning something like chief squid. The species name used today is Architeuthis dux. This was a turning point. Giving an animal a scientific name does not mean that all mysteries disappear, but it changes the question. Instead of asking whether a sea monster exists, scientists can ask what species it belongs to, where it lives, what it eats, and how it evolved. The mysterious creature becomes a subject of zoology. And yet, in the case of the giant squid, the transition from legend to science would take many more decades. Scientists had a name. They still needed bodies. One of the most important 19th century encounters occurred in 1861. A French naval vessel called the Electon encountered a large squid near the Canary Islands. The crew attempted to capture it. The animal was damaged during the attempt, and only part of it could be recovered. From a modern perspective, the episode may seem frustrating. Scientists would have loved a complete specimen, but at the time, even partial remains mattered. The Electon encounter became widely discussed and contributed to growing scientific acceptance that enormous squid were real animals. This period also overlapped with a cultural fascination with the unknown sea. In 1870, Jules Verne published 20,000 Leagues Under the Seas. Its dramatic encounters with giant cephalopods helped establish the image of the enormous squid as a creature of adventure and danger. Fiction and science now influenced each other. Real reports inspired writers. Popular stories increased public interest in real animals, and the giant squid gradually became one of the defining mysteries of the deep ocean. But some of the best evidence was about to come from a place far across the Atlantic: Newfoundland. During the 1870s and the following years, an unusual number of giant squid appeared around Newfoundland. Bodies and pieces washed ashore or were encountered by fishermen. For naturalists, this was an extraordinary opportunity. One of the central figures was a clergyman and amateur naturalist named Moses Harvey, who lived in St. John's. Harvey became fascinated by reports of enormous squid. In 1873, he obtained a large tentacle from a specimen encountered by fishermen. Soon afterward, another almost complete giant squid became available. Harvey purchased the animal and brought it to his home. There was an obvious practical problem. How do you display an enormous squid in a 19th century living room? Harvey used what was available. The squid was arranged over a structure used for bathing, so that the body and limbs could be spread out. A photograph was made. That image became one of the earliest and most famous photographs of a giant squid specimen. Today, we live in a world filled with wildlife photography. We can watch high-definition videos of animals from almost every continent. But imagine seeing Harvey's photograph in the 19th century. For generations, people had heard stories of enormous, tentacled creatures. Now there was a photograph, not an engraving, not a sailor's drawing, not a mythological illustration. A photograph of an actual animal. Its arms and tentacles could be measured. Its body could be examined. It could be sent to professional zoologists. Harvey's specimens eventually contributed to the work of American zoologist Addison Emery Verrill. Verrill examined material from Newfoundland and produced some of the earliest detailed scientific descriptions and illustrations of giant squid. The animal was becoming physically real to science. During roughly the 1870s and 1880s, the number of Newfoundland strandings increased dramatically. This period gave researchers much more anatomical information than they had possessed before. Why so many squid appeared there during those decades is not completely certain. Later researchers suggested that changing ocean conditions and currents may have played a role. Cold water patterns near Newfoundland could perhaps have brought squid closer to shore or placed them under environmental stress. Whatever the cause, those strandings transformed the scientific record. A creature once known mainly from rumor was now represented by specimens. Researchers could study its mantle, its arms, its feeding tentacles, its suckers, its beak, its internal organs, its eyes. Piece by piece, the legendary sea monster became Architeuthis dux. Yet there was a major limitation. Almost every giant squid being studied was dead. This created a distorted picture of the animal. A dead giant squid looks very different from a living one. Its body loses muscular tension. Its skin may become pale or damaged. Its arms lie loosely. Its long tentacles stretch across the ground. The animal can look like an enormous, shapeless mass. That appearance contributed to the old image of the giant squid as a slow and perhaps helpless creature. But nobody really knew how it behaved while alive in deep water. This is an important lesson in studying animals. A specimen tells us about anatomy. It does not necessarily tell us about behavior. A museum can reveal the structure of a wing. It cannot show the flight of a bird. A preserved shark can reveal teeth and muscles. It cannot show the subtle movements of a hunting shark. And a giant squid lying on a laboratory table cannot show how Architeuthis moves through darkness hundreds of meters below the surface. For that, scientists needed to see one alive. That goal would prove surprisingly difficult. Throughout the 20th century, giant squid continued to appear occasionally. Specimens washed ashore in different parts of the world. Fishing vessels brought others up from deep water. Museums preserved them. Researchers measured them and compared their anatomy. New Zealand and Australia became especially important regions for study. During the 1980s and 1990s, several specimens were recovered from waters in that part of the world. Trawlers sometimes brought giant squid to the surface. Scientists gathered quickly when news of a fresh specimen arrived. A recently dead giant squid could provide information that an old museum specimen could not. Tissues could be sampled, stomach contents could be examined, eggs could be studied, genetic material could eventually be analyzed. Still, the central challenge remained. Where was the living animal? By the late 20th century, technology had improved dramatically. Researchers now had underwater cameras, deep diving submersibles, robotic vehicles, electronic tracking equipment. They knew sperm whales ate giant squid. Perhaps the whales could lead them to their prey. Smithsonian zoologist Clyde Roper became one of the scientists most closely associated with the search. Roper and other researchers made repeated attempts to find a giant squid in its natural environment. One strategy involved sperm whales. If whales were so good at finding squid, perhaps a camera attached to a whale could travel into the right depths. Researchers used small animal-borne cameras in attempts to see what whales saw. Other projects sent remotely operated or autonomous cameras downward. Scientists descended in submersibles. Bait was suspended in deep water. The logic seemed straightforward. The animal was large. It existed in many parts of the world. Whales found it. Fishing vessels sometimes caught it. Surely a camera could find one. But expedition after expedition returned without the image everyone wanted. The deep sea kept its secret. Why is finding a giant squid so difficult? Part of the answer is scale. Imagine searching for one moving object in hundreds of cubic kilometers of dark water. A camera sees only a small area. Even bright lights illuminate only a limited distance. And bright lights may create another problem. Deep-sea animals live in an environment where intense artificial illumination does not naturally occur. Researchers began to suspect that conventional underwater filming systems might actually frighten away the animals they hoped to see. Sound could matter, light could matter, vibration could matter. The presence of a large submersible itself might matter. Finding a giant squid required not only going to the correct depth, Scientists had to enter its world without making that world too different. That insight eventually became very important. In 2004, a major breakthrough finally occurred. Japanese researchers Tsunemi Kubedera and Kayoichi Mori worked near the Ogasawara Islands of Japan. They lowered a baited camera system into deep water. The approach was based partly on information from sperm whales and known squid habitat. Then something appeared. A giant squid approached the bait. The camera captured a sequence of photographs. For the first time, scientists had photographs of a living giant squid in its natural deep water habitat. After centuries of reports, preserved bodies, fragments, and speculation, Architeuthis had finally been seen alive where it actually lived. The images also challenged some assumptions. The squid did not appear like a passive, shapeless animal. It actively attacked the bait. Its arms and tentacles moved with purpose. It was clearly capable of dynamic, predatory behavior. The event made international news, but researchers wanted more. Still photographs were extraordinary. Video would be better. And observing an animal without hooking it would reveal even more natural behavior. The search continued. A few years later, researchers succeeded in bringing a live giant squid toward the surface while recording it. But one of the greatest moments came in 2012. An international group included Tsunemi Kubedera, oceanographer Edith Witter, and other specialists. They returned to waters near Japan with different methods of attracting the squid. One of the most innovative tools involved bioluminescence. Edith Witter had spent years studying how light is used by organisms in the deep sea. Many animals there produce flashes and patterns of light. One particularly interesting behavior occurs when certain jellyfish are attacked. They produce a bright display that may attract an even larger predator. The idea is sometimes described as a kind of burglar alarm. If a small predator attacks the jellyfish, the light may attract a bigger predator that could attack the original attacker. Witter developed an electronic lure that imitated this visual signal. Rather than flooding the sea with bright artificial lights, the camera system could operate more quietly and use a biologically meaningful signal. The researchers called the lure an electronic jellyfish, or e-jelly. Other bait was also used. And then, at last, a giant squid appeared. Kubedera observed it from a submersible. The animal emerged from the darkness. Instead of the pale, damaged bodies familiar from beaches and museum tanks, this squid was alive, controlled, and moving naturally through its environment. Its body reflected bronze and silvery tones. Its arms moved together. Its feeding behavior could be watched directly. For scientists who had spent years searching, the moment represented a fundamental change. Human beings were no longer reconstructing the living giant squid entirely from dead remains. We were watching it. The footage was later seen around the world. A creature that had lived for centuries on the border between zoology and legend was now unmistakably present on camera. And yet, the film did not end the mystery. It increased it. Now scientists had new questions. Was this behavior typical? Was the squid normally active or slow? Did it usually hunt by chasing prey or by waiting? How often did it use its long feeding tentacles? How did it react to other giant squid? A few minutes of extraordinary footage had opened a new era. But the deep ocean still held almost all of the animal's life beyond our view. Later observations showed that the 2012 encounter was not completely unique. Giant squid have been filmed on other occasions. In 2019, for example, researchers working in the Gulf of Mexico recorded a giant squid after attracting it with a deep-sea camera system. These repeated encounters are important. One observation can always raise questions. Several observations allow comparisons. Still, footage remains rare. That rarity explains why even simple statements about giant squid behavior should be made cautiously. A whale can be watched for hours. A bird population can be studied over generations. For giant squid, researchers may celebrate a few precious minutes of video. Science must build slowly from those moments. What does the giant squid eat? Direct observation remains limited, so much of our knowledge comes from examining stomach contents and from the animal's anatomy. Evidence shows that giant squid eat deep-sea fish and other squid. They use the two long feeding tentacles to seize prey. The clubs at the ends of those tentacles carry strong suckers equipped with toothed rings. Once the prey has been caught, the tentacles draw it toward the 8 shorter arms. The arms hold and manipulate it near the mouth. The hard beak cuts the food. The radula processes it further. Then the pieces pass through the esophagus toward the stomach. This feeding system is both simple and extraordinary. A giant squid does not need jaws like a shark. It has evolved a completely different solution. Long, flexible limbs reach outward. Suckers grip. Arms gather. A beak cuts. All of this takes place in darkness. Scientists have generally regarded giant squid as solitary hunters because individuals are normally encountered alone. But once again, certainty is difficult. Humans have seen so little of their lives that social behavior cannot be completely ruled out. There is also evidence that giant squid sometimes interact aggressively with one another. Some specimens have shown injuries consistent with attacks by other giant squid. Beak remains from giant squid have also been found inside the stomachs of giant squid. That suggests that cannibalism can occur. It may involve direct predation. It may occur during competition for food, or different situations may produce different behaviors. The deep sea does not offer easy answers. And then there is the sperm whale. The relationship between giant squid and sperm whales may be the most famous part of the giant squid story. Popular illustrations often show the two animals locked in a dramatic battle. The whale descends. The giant squid wraps tentacles around it. The whale bites. The squid struggles. It is an unforgettable image, but scientific evidence requires a little more restraint. We know sperm whales eat giant squid. That is clear from squid beaks and other remains found inside whales. We also know some sperm whales carry circular sucker scars. Those scars show that squid sometimes make contact with the whale's skin during an encounter. What we usually do not know is exactly how the entire encounter unfolds. There is no reason to imagine two equally matched monsters meeting for an organized duel. The whale is the predator, the giant squid is prey. An adult squid may resist powerfully. Its arms, tentacles, and suckers may leave marks. But the evidence from whale stomachs makes the final relationship clear. Sperm whales are highly successful squid hunters. Indeed, sperm whales were among the most valuable guides scientists had when searching for giant squid. Researchers studied where whales dived. They attached cameras to whales. They examined stomach contents. The predator helped reveal the prey. And giant squid probably make up only part of the sperm whale's broad, deep-sea diet. The ocean contains many squid species, yet the repeated presence of Architeuthis remains demonstrated something important. However mysterious giant squid seemed to us, they were part of an active deep-sea ecosystem. They were eating. They were being eaten. They were not isolated monsters hidden outside nature. They belonged to a food web. The giant squid begins life at a size almost impossible to reconcile with the adult animal. Like other squid, it hatches from an egg. Young individuals are tiny compared with adults. They must grow enormously in a relatively short period. Exactly how long a giant squid lives remains uncertain. Some studies, including work based on structures called statoliths, have suggested lifespans of only a few years. Other researchers argue that deep-sea growth may not follow the same patterns observed in shallow water squid, and have suggested that the animals could live longer. Recent scientific discussions, therefore, tend to acknowledge genuine uncertainty. This uncertainty is worth emphasizing because older popular accounts sometimes present one lifespan as a settled fact. It is not. We know giant squid grow rapidly relative to their enormous final size, but the exact pace and total lifespan remain questions for future research. A statolith is a small, hard structure inside the squid's balance organ, the statocyst. It helps the animal sense orientation and movement. In many cephalopods, microscopic growth increments in statoliths can provide information about age. The idea is somewhat similar to studying growth rings, but interpreting those rings in a deep-sea giant is difficult. Without raising known-age giant squid from hatching to adulthood, scientists cannot easily test every assumption, and no one has yet succeeded in maintaining a giant squid through its complete life cycle in captivity. That missing piece affects many areas of research. If a giant squid could be raised from a juvenile, scientists could directly measure growth. They could observe feeding. They could see color changes. They could study development. They could watch its behavior without waiting for a rare deep-sea encounter. Researchers have tried, but keeping delicate deep-sea squid alive is extremely difficult. Changes in pressure, temperature, water chemistry, and stress can quickly become fatal. The challenge is enormous. So for now, the life of a young Architeuthis remains another quiet mystery moving somewhere in the ocean. Reproduction is even less understood. Male and female giant squid have very different reproductive anatomy. Females can contain enormous numbers of small eggs. The eggs themselves are tiny compared with the adult animal. They are believed to be released within a gelatinous mass. Exactly where this happens, at what depth, and under what conditions remain uncertain. The mating process is also unusual. In many squid species, a male transfers packets of sperm using a specially modified arm. Giant squid appear to use a different system. Males produce packages of sperm called spermatophores. Evidence from female specimens suggests that males implant these sperm packets into tissue on the female's arms or body. How the sperm later reaches and fertilizes the eggs is not fully understood. No scientist has watched a complete mating sequence of giant squid in their natural habitat. Think about the practical challenge. Two animals must somehow find one another in a dark ocean. They may live across enormous areas. Scientists do not know whether chemical signals help them locate mates. They do not know whether there is courtship. They do not know how long the animals remain together. And they do not know exactly what happens between mating and egg-laying. This entire stage of life is occurring somewhere beneath the surface. It may be happening regularly, yet humans have almost no direct view of it. The giant squid reminds us that even in the modern world, basic events in the lives of very large animals can remain unseen. Another long-standing scientific question involved the number of giant squid species. During the 19th and 20th centuries, researchers described specimens from different parts of the world and sometimes gave them different species names. This was understandable. A squid from the North Atlantic might look slightly different from one found near New Zealand. Specimens were often incomplete. Damage could alter shape. Age and sex could create differences. Researchers had no genetic tools. For years, scientists debated whether Architeuthis represented several species distributed around the globe. Modern DNA analysis changed that picture. Genetic studies comparing giant squid from widely separated oceans found surprisingly little variation. The evidence strongly supports the idea that the world's giant squid belong to a single species, Architeuthis ducks. That result is remarkable. Consider the distance between Newfoundland and New Zealand, between Japan and South Africa, between Northern Europe and Australia. These are enormous separations. Yet giant squid across the world appear to be closely related members of one widely distributed species. How does a species maintain such broad genetic connections? The answer may involve the earliest stages of life. Tiny young squid can be carried by ocean currents before they grow into the enormous deep-sea animals we imagine. They may travel long distances through moving water. Over many generations, those currents could connect populations across huge regions. Once again, the history of the giant squid becomes a history of the ocean itself. Currents, temperature, dude, predators, all shape where Architeuthis can live. The giant squid is sometimes described as an example of deep-sea gigantism. The idea is that certain groups of animals living in deeper or colder environments can reach unusually large body sizes compared with related animals from shallower waters. But there is no single explanation that applies to every deep-sea giant. Temperature may matter. Food availability may matter. Predation may matter. Metabolism may matter. Oxygen availability may matter. Different species may become large for different evolutionary reasons. Being large can offer advantages. A bigger animal can potentially travel farther between meals. It can capture a wider range of prey. Once fully grown, it has fewer predators capable of attacking it. But becoming large also requires energy, and young giant squid do not begin life as giants. They must survive while small. Juveniles can be eaten by fish, seabirds, sharks, and marine mammals. Only after enormous growth does an Architeuthis enter the size range that gives it some protection. Even then, sperm whales remain formidable predators. So the giant squid's size is not a magical shield. It is one part of an evolutionary balance. Now, it may be helpful to return briefly to the giant squid's heavier relative in popular imagination, the colossal squid. The two names sound almost interchangeable. Giant, colossal. But the animals are different. The giant squid is Architeuthis dux. The colossal squid is Architeuthis hamiltoni. Giant squid occur in several oceans around the world. Colossal squid are associated with Antarctic and Southern Ocean waters. A giant squid has an elongated body and exceptionally long feeding tentacles. A colossal squid has a more massive, compact body. It can reach a greater weight. Its limbs are relatively shorter. Researchers know remarkably little about colossal squid as well. For much of scientific history, evidence came from remains discovered in sperm whale stomachs or from animals accidentally caught by fishing vessels. The first scientific report of the colossal squid dates to the 20th century, much later than the ancient references associated with large squid more generally. For many years, no living colossal squid had been observed in its natural deep-sea habitat. That changed only very recently, a reminder that the age of deep ocean discovery is still continuing. The comparison also helps explain why sensational claims about giant squid size should be treated carefully. The longest animal is not automatically the heaviest. A long feeding tentacle can add meters without adding enormous mass. The colossal squid may therefore be physically heavier, even if a giant squid extends farther from fin to tentacle tip. Nature does not always fit neatly into a single record. Museums have played an unusually important role in giant squid research. Because encounters are so rare, every preserved specimen can remain scientifically useful for decades. A squid collected many years ago may be studied again, using a technology that did not exist when the animal was found. DNA can be extracted, chemical composition can be examined, clear structures can be scanned. Measurements can be compared with newly discovered specimens. The Natural History Museum in London, for example, preserves a famous giant squid known as Archie. The specimen was caught near the Falkland Islands and eventually became part of the museum's research collection. Other museums around the world keep giant squid in large preservation tanks or frozen collections. New Zealand's museums have played a major role in preserving both giant and colossal squid. These collections are not simply displays of strange animals, they are scientific archives. Imagine a library where the books are biological specimens. Each animal contains information about the time and place in which it lived. Its tissues contain genetics. Its stomach may contain evidence of prey. Its body carries signs of injury and growth. Its reproductive organs may reveal its stage of development. Its size can be compared with other individuals. And because no scientist can predict when the next giant squid will appear, preserving each specimen becomes especially valuable. There is also something almost poetic about the contrast between the living animal and the preserved specimen. In the ocean, a giant squid exists in darkness. Its body is supported by water. Its skin can appear reddish, bronze, or silvery depending on conditions and observation. Its arms move. Its mantle contracts. Its eyes respond to faint light. Its fins adjust its direction. It is part of a moving, three-dimensional environment. Remitting it from that environment, and everything changes. The body loses support, color fades, tissues change, long tentacles lie motionless. The mysterious animal becomes a specimen. For most of scientific history, people knew the second form, but not the first. That is why the first deep-sea images were so important. They restored movement to an animal science had known mostly in stillness. The history of the giant squid is also a history of changing human attitudes toward the unknown. At first, unusual observations became legends. Then legends became questions. Questions became specimens. Specimens became scientific descriptions. Descriptions led to expeditions. Expeditions led to photographs. Photographs led to video. And video created still more questions. This is how science often works. Knowledge does not always move from ignorance to a neat, final answer. Sometimes, every answer reveals a larger area of uncertainty. For example, once researchers confirmed that giant squid existed, they wanted to know how large they became. Once size was better understood, they wanted to know how they moved. Once they filmed movement, they wanted to know whether the observed behavior was typical. Once genetics suggested a single worldwide species, researchers wanted to understand how populations remained connected. Every discovery opens another door. And perhaps no subject illustrates that better than the question of population. How many giant squid are there? Nobody knows. Not with precision. They are too difficult to count directly. There is no practical way to survey the world's deep continental slopes and simply record every animal. So scientists have sometimes approached the question indirectly. Once again, sperm whales provide clues. If researchers know approximately how many sperm whales live in a region, how much they eat, and how often giant squid remains appear in their diet, they can attempt rough estimates of how many squid must exist to support that predation. Such calculations suggest that giant squid may number in the millions worldwide. The exact figure is highly uncertain, but the broad implication is fascinating. An animal that most people will never see may actually be widespread and numerous. Rarity of observation is not necessarily rarity of existence. A creature can be common in a habitat humans rarely enter. This may be one of the most important lessons the giant squid offers. The world is shaped by human perspective. We call the surface familiar because we live there. We call the deep mysterious because we do not. To a giant squid, perhaps our bright surface world would be the strange place. Normally, without adding anything beyond what science allows us to say, an ordinary period in the life of an adult giant squid. It is somewhere hundreds of meters below the ocean surface. There is little or no sunlight. The water is cold. Its enormous eyes gather whatever faint light is available. The animal is nearly neutrally buoyant, so it does not need to fight constantly against sinking. Small movements of the fins help adjust its position. The mantle can contract when stronger movement is required. Somewhere nearby, deep-sea fish or squid may be moving. The giant squid detects an opportunity. Its 2 feeding tentacles can extend far beyond the reach of its 8 arms. Suckers on the clubs grip prey. The prey is drawn inward. The arms gather around it. The beak and radula process the meal. Later, perhaps, the squid moves along a slope or through deeper water. Somewhere in the darkness, a sperm whale may be diving. The squid has no awareness of human mythology. It knows nothing of krakens, nothing of Jules Verne, nothing of museum tanks or scientific names. It is simply an animal living its life. That may be the calmest way to think about Architeuthis, not as a monster, not even primarily as a mystery, but as one member of an ocean ecosystem that existed long before humans understood it. There is a strange tendency in human history to turn large, unfamiliar animals into symbols. Whales became sea monsters, sharks became villains, large snakes became dragons. The giant squid became the kraken. Yet when science finally reaches these animals, the reality is often more interesting than the myth. The giant squid does not need to sink ships to be extraordinary. There is no reliable evidence that healthy giant squid routinely attack boats or people. The famous image of a giant squid wrapping itself around a sailing ship belongs mainly to fiction and folklore. The real animal has another story. It lives at depths that humans rarely visit. It grows from a tiny egg into one of the longest invertebrates on Earth. It has some of the largest eyes in the animal kingdom. Its prey-catching tentacles carry hundreds of suckers equipped with hard, serrated rings. It moves using jet propulsion. Its body chemistry helps it float without a gas-filled swim bladder. It is eaten by one of the deepest diving mammals on Earth. It appears to belong to a single species distributed across much of the world's oceans. And humans did not photograph it alive in its natural habitat until the 21st century. None of that requires exaggeration. Reality is unusual enough. The slow disappearance of the kraken into the real Architeuthis is therefore not a story about science making the world less magical. It may be the opposite. The mythical kraken was limited only by imagination. It could be made as large as a storyteller wanted. It could attack any ship. It could live anywhere. The real giant squid must obey biology. And because it obeys biology, every part of its existence raises meaningful questions. How does a nervous system coordinate 10 large limbs? How do eyes the size of dinner plates process faint light? How does a young squid acquire enough food to grow so quickly? How does a male locate a female? How do tiny offspring disperse through ocean currents? How does one species remain connected across huge stretches of sea? How does it react when the clicking sounds of a hunting sperm whale approach through the darkness? These are questions about a real world, a world still mostly beyond direct human observation. Even the giant squid's nervous system contains one of those wonderful biological oddities that sounds almost fictional. Its brain forms a ring around the esophagus. The animal's digestive passage therefore travels through the center of its brain. This is one reason food must be cut into relatively small pieces before being swallowed. The squid's beak and radula are not simply useful for capturing prey. They are necessary for safely preparing food for this unusual internal route. Cephalopods in general are known for relatively complex nervous systems. Octopuses, cuttlefish, and squid can show sophisticated behavior. How giant squid use their nervous systems is still difficult to study because we have almost no opportunity to watch them for extended periods. We should therefore avoid assuming that a giant squid behaves exactly like a smaller squid enlarged 10 times. Different species evolve different strategies. But its anatomy tells us that this enormous body is controlled by a highly specialized cephalopod nervous system. Each arm must respond, each tentacle must coordinate, the mantle muscles must contract, the fins must adjust, the eyes must gather information, the siphon must direct water. All of it happens in an animal without bones. That last point is worth remembering. A giant squid is an enormous animal built almost entirely from soft tissues. There is no massive skeleton supporting its length. Water itself supports much of the body. This is one reason marine animals can evolve shapes and sizes that would be difficult to maintain on land. Take a giant squid out of water, and its body loses the environment for which it evolved. Place it back in deep water, and its long form makes much more sense. Its color is also easily misunderstood. Beached specimens often look pale. Preserved specimens may become whitish. Yet living giant squid can appear reddish or bronze. Like many cephalopods, their skin contains specialized pigment structures. Exactly how extensively giant squid use rapid color change is not as well documented as it is in familiar shallow water squid and octopuses. But the living animals seen in deep-sea footage looked very different from the pale bodies that shaped earlier public imagination. This difference between life and death contributed to one of the most memorable reactions to the first natural footage. The giant squid suddenly looked like an animal rather than a relic. The history of giant squid research also contains long periods when chance seemed more successful than planning. Scientists spent years mounting expensive expeditions and returned without a sighting. Then, a fisherman might accidentally bring up a specimen. A squid might appear in a harbor. A carcass might wash onto a beach. Nature did not follow the researchers' schedule. One reason for the success of later deep-sea observation was that scientists began thinking more carefully about the squid's own sensory environment. Instead of asking only, "Where should we put a camera?" they began asking, "What does the squid notice? What signals matter in darkness? Could bright white light repel the very animal we want to observe? Could bioluminescent signals attract its attention more naturally?" That shift helped researchers design less intrusive systems. The E-jelly was a beautiful example. Rather than forcing the deep ocean to resemble a brightly lit laboratory, it used a signal drawn from the biology of the deep sea itself. And eventually, the squid came close enough to be recorded. Sometimes the best way to observe an animal is to disturb its world as little as possible. There will almost certainly be more discoveries. Underwater cameras are becoming more sensitive. Robotic vehicles can travel farther and remain underwater longer. Environmental DNA may allow scientists to detect traces of animals without seeing them directly. New tagging methods may eventually reveal movements. Genomic studies can compare populations. Better pressure-controlled aquariums could someday help researchers keep delicate deep-sea species alive for longer periods. None of these methods guarantees that the giant squid will become an ordinary research animal. Its habitat will remain difficult, but the direction of history is clear. For centuries, scientists worked from stories, then from fragments, then from complete dead specimens, then from photographs, then from video. The next stage may involve longer and less intrusive observation. Perhaps one day scientists will watch a giant squid hunt naturally for hours, Perhaps they will observe mating. Perhaps they will discover where egg masses develop. Perhaps they will follow young squid as currents carry them through the ocean. Perhaps they will finally determine a reliable lifespan. Each of those achievements would answer questions that remain open tonight. And there is another reason those answers matter. The deep ocean is changing. Temperature patterns are shifting. Oxygen levels in some waters can change. Fishing reaches into deeper environments. Noise travels through the sea. Plastic and other human-made materials have been found in places once considered remote. Because the life history of giant squid is still poorly understood, it can be difficult to know exactly how environmental change may affect them. A species can be widespread and still depend on particular temperatures, depths, currents, or prey. Understanding the giant squid is therefore not only a matter of satisfying curiosity, it is part of understanding the deep ocean ecosystem. And that ecosystem covers an enormous portion of our planet. The ocean may look familiar from a beach, a line of waves, a horizon, sunlight reflecting from the surface. But most of the ocean is not that bright surface. Most of its volume lies below. The giant squid belongs to that larger, hidden ocean. For thousands of years, human beings crossed above its world in wooden ships, sailing vessels, steamships, submarines, and modern cargo vessels. Generations lived and died while Architeuthis continued below. Ancient Greeks described large squid. Roman writers recorded extraordinary marine creatures. Northern European stories imagined sea monsters. Danish zoologists studied mysterious remains. French sailors encountered a large squid in the 19th century. Newfoundland fishermen brought enormous tentacles ashore. Moses Harvey arranged a specimen for an early photograph. Professional zoologists described its anatomy. Museums collected more specimens. Scientists followed sperm whales. Deep-sea expeditions searched. Japanese researchers finally photographed a living animal. International teams later filmed one in its own dark habitat. And all through that history, the giant squid itself changed very little. The transformation was ours. We became better at seeing it. Perhaps that is why the giant squid remains such a powerful subject for a quiet night story. Its history moves slowly from darkness into knowledge. At first, there are only hints. A strange body on a shore, a mark on a whale, a sailor's memory, a tentacle, a photograph. Then, a camera lowered into black water, a faint shape appears. And something that once belonged mainly to imagination becomes visible, but only for a moment. Then it returns to the darkness. There is something comforting in knowing that the world still contains places like this. Not because they are frightening, but because they remind us how large the natural world remains. We have maps of the oceans, satellites pass overhead, ships cross almost every sea. Yet an animal more than 10 meters long can spend nearly its entire life beyond our sight. Not in another world, not in another age. Here, on Earth, now. So, as tonight's story begins to grow quieter, we can return once more to the animal itself. Architeuthis dux, the giant squid, a mollusk, a cephalopod, a deep-sea predator, an animal with 8 arms and 2 extraordinarily long feeding tentacles, an animal with enormous eyes adapted to dim water, an animal whose suckers can leave circular marks on the skin of a sperm whale. an animal that uses a beak and a toothed radula to prepare its food, an animal that moves partly by forcing water through a siphon, an animal whose body chemistry helps it remain suspended in the deep. A species distributed across much of the world's oceans, a species we still struggle to observe, and an animal that spent centuries moving gradually through human imagination from sea monster to scientific reality. It was never necessary for the giant squid to be a kraken. The truth was already remarkable. If you imagine the ocean tonight, there is no need to imagine a monster. Instead, imagine distance. Hundreds of meters of quiet water, then darkness, cold water moving slowly along a continental slope, small points of biological light appearing and disappearing, a fish passing through the darkness. Farther away, perhaps the faint presence of a diving whale, and somewhere in that enormous space, a giant squid moving almost unseen, its fins making small adjustments, its mantle breathing, its large eyes receiving the faintest traces of light, its arms gathered near its head, its two feeding tentacles extending beyond them. No ship above knows it is there, no camera sees it, no scientist records it. For most giant squid, this is probably how nearly every moment of life passes, completely outside human observation. And perhaps that is the final fact worth remembering. The giant squid is famous because it is mysterious to us, but mystery is something that exists in the observer. For the squid, the deep sea is simply home. More than 2,000 years have passed since ancient writers first described unusually large squid. More than a century and a half has passed since 19th century scientists began placing the giant squid firmly within zoology. Only in the 21st century did humans finally obtain clear images of healthy giant squid living in the depths. That timeline alone tells us something about the scale of the ocean. We discovered distant planets through telescopes before we learned to watch some of the largest animals in our own seas behaving naturally, and there are undoubtedly many more stories waiting in the deep. The giant squid may no longer be a mythical creature, but it remains an invitation to look carefully, to separate evidence from exaggeration, to remain comfortable with unanswered questions, and to remember that science can make the unknown more interesting, not less. The giant squid began in human culture as a shape at the edge of certainty. Over time, evidence accumulated. The animal received a name: Architeuthis ducks. Its body was measured, its anatomy described, its relationship with sperm whales recognized, its worldwide genetic connection discovered, its movements finally recorded. And yet, after all of that, if a scientist wants to see one tomorrow, there is no simple place to go. There is no reef where giant squid gather every afternoon, no island where they come ashore, no reliable migration viewpoint. The scientist must still descend into darkness and hope. That is a rare thing in modern natural history, and it is part of what makes the giant squid so extraordinary. For now, the deep ocean continues quietly. Currents move along unseen slopes. Sperm whales dive. Deep-sea fish produce brief flashes of light. Tiny squid grow. Somewhere, perhaps, an egg mass drifts through dark water. Somewhere else, a young Architeuthis begins the extraordinary process of becoming a giant. And somewhere far below a calm ocean surface, an adult giant squid may be moving through a world that humans have only just begun to understand. No ancient monster, no legendary destroyer of ships, just one of the strangest and most beautiful results of life in the ocean. A real creature that once seemed impossible. A creature that became a legend before it became a scientific certainty. And a creature that, even now, still keeps much of its story hidden in the dark. The giant squid, Architeuthis ducks, still swimming somewhere below, still largely unseen, still reminding us that the ocean is much deeper, much larger, and much less familiar than it appears from the shore. And perhaps, as you rest now, that is a peaceful place to leave tonight's story. Far beneath the waves, in cold, quiet water, where the light slowly disappears, and the giant squid continues on through the deep.